Apple's plan to take down Google. Welcome to the All Future podcast, where we talk all things Apple, AI, and tech throughout the week. If you're enjoying these videos, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider it. We're bringing these out at least 3 times a week, talking about all of these different topics and kind of how they relate in a broad future context, as goes the title of the podcast. So joining us from Scotland today is our producer, Andrew. And today we're talking about Apple. Actually, how they're not really involved in this current debate or current issue between Google and the Department of Justice. It looks to be an antitrust situation, which I didn't really expect to see coming, but is also a little overdue probably for Google. So yeah, give us a brief overview of this and your thoughts on this, Andrew.
Yeah, so they're trying to make Google split Chrome and a couple other companies into separate companies, but right now the focus is on splitting Chrome into a separate company. The reason why they think this is important is because Chrome gives you all your browser information, and the default search engine in Chrome is Google. And so why is that a big deal? Well, Chrome is the biggest browser out there.
Yeah, Chrome is the most popular browser in the world. It has 65% of the market share. After that is Safari with 18.6%. Then you have Edge from Microsoft with 5.25%. And then Firefox at 2.65%. So if you want to be very cool and very exclusive, you're going to be using Firefox. But if you're going to be the vast majority of people, you're going to be using Chrome. And then, of course, your default search engine within that is Google. And you can change it, but it's most people don't. It's just going to be, you're using the Google browser, you're going to use Google.
Yeah, so Google's crazy monopoly isn't some of these subsidiary companies, but it's still search. Google search is 90% of all search in the entire world, which is wild. Not any other company has more than 5% is Bing. They lost 3% market share to Bing last year, and that was a huge deal. But they use those profits from Google Ads and Google Search to, funnel into these other businesses they create. They created Chrome from that money. They created Waymo from that money that we're going to talk about. They created Android from that money that we're going to talk about. And now, for some reason, the DOJ, after however many years, over a decade of having these products and them having these crazy 90% monopoly, over 50% monopoly, this reminds me of the old days when PCs were all the rage and they had to give Apple money to still be competitive. And they started making lawsuits about these things. It was a completely different landscape when computers first came out. And they did things in that era to make sure that Apple could stay competitive against Microsoft and Windows. And in the past 10 years, they should have done something if they wanted to, deal with these things. But the fact that they're dealing with them now is it just feels way too late.
Yeah, the search engine domination of Google, I guess, it dropped from 93.47% in 2023 down to 90.01%. So, that is a little bit of a drop, but I mean, yeah, it's peanuts in Google's mind, especially when you think about it and you talk about it's like Kleenex. It's ubiquitous, the term Googling something. Most people don't even have a term that they would use differently, like, oh, hey, let me search that. I guess that works, but I don't know. It's like a different thought that the way that you're searching it, you're Googling it, you're looking at the entire internet for that thing. You're not just doing a quick look around. It's ubiquitous with it. So yeah, it makes sense that it's this monopoly, and it feels crazy that it would ever change, but it's going to change with AI stuff, which we'll get to in a second, but also the Department of Justice wants to do something about it, at least separating it from Chrome in the meantime.
It's so odd. And then when they do things like that, so one thing is it separates the money and is trying to separate the partnership. So what it's also trying to do is make it so Safari and Apple can't make Google their default search browser, that you actually have to have a prompt come up every time that says, what browser do you want to use? And I still don't think that's going to matter because just like you said, it's so ubiquitous with search at this point. What are they going to do? What is that little browser going to do? Is Bing better than Google? It's not. And so this is like no threat to Google's dominance to just put in a couple radio buttons that say, I want to use Google. You're not putting a prompt that says like, Google like takes your information and does X, Y, and Z with it. Do you want that? That's the only way that they could actually, well, if you don't know, Chrome takes all your data and gives it to Google. Everything you're searching, everything you go to, there's no privacy there. They use all your data from Chrome to put into their Google Ads system to advertise you on Google search and other websites that use Google Ads. So that's where the whole sort of monopoly comes into play. And Google is much more like a Facebook than anyone wants to make them out to be. I feel like they have a better reputation than Zuckerberg, but they're doing all the exact same things. Every search you put into YouTube under an account, everything you put into Google Docs, all those things, like all those privacy agreements, let them use a lot of your data that you're putting out there to feed you ads through this whole system. So it is a monopoly, but other companies like Facebook have these kinds of monopolies too. Facebook is also an ads company. Facebook is also kind of a browser, like where you use things in Facebook and they can use things to advertise you as you watch video content, as you flip through Instagram. It's taking all that data and it's, making advertising points on you. So if we're going to break up Google, we need to start breaking up Facebook. If we're going to break up Facebook and make these things not happen, we need to start breaking up Apple's partnerships from all these companies too. It's not going to end at just spinning off something like Chrome. It's like a way bigger issue than that.
Yeah, and another data point for that is that the second largest search engine in the world, when you're looking at everything, is actually YouTube. So that's
they
also
have
owned
number
by Google.
1 and number 2.
Yeah, when you look at it a little more broadly than just like a direct text-to-text result and website result search engine. So that's already crazy right there. But they are talking about spinning off other parts of Google's business, including Android. So this one is that they want to have more app stores so that it's more competitive. And this immediately makes me think about Apple and their singular app store here, but then how over in the EU they've been forced to allow third-party app stores on those devices.
Yeah, this is the biggest one that's going to affect Apple directly. And like you said, in the EU, they've already done this. They made it so Apple has to have different app stores, and Apple hates this. They're famously in a fight with, what's the creator of Fortnite named?
Epic Games.
Yeah, they're famously in a fight with Epic Games. Fortnite has not been on an iPhone in a long time, and the reason is Epic Games doesn't want to pay Apple's fees for every microtransaction. Can you imagine every microtransaction a kid makes in Fortnite? Apple's going to break off and have to take 30% of that. Now in the EU, Epic Games can have its own app store and not have to break any of that money off to Apple. You're talking about, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that Apple's going to be losing out on there. This is like a huge implication, and this is a huge implication to something like Google, to where if you spin off Android, now you're not going to have Gmail pre-installed. You're not going to have any of these Google Suite apps pre-installed. You'd need to go to the App Store to use them. Google Play Store also breaks off a percentage and pays Google. So if you're going to break that off, you're also going to have to break off the App Store in the United States. And that sets precedent for both those companies. And the thought process here is you do want to use the app stores that are, more secure and that Apple approves. Like you don't want to just download some crazy malware or something like that onto your device. But, if something's available and it's 30% cheaper in a store that's not going to take some kind of crazy cut, like you might roll the dice on if it's an expensive app or something that you need to use or something that's not even available because Apple just doesn't want it on there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like jailbreaking your phone or having access to things that Apple doesn't approve. And it's going to look like that if they spin off Android and make those rules the rules.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see Google particularly targeted here. And I'm curious to see where this goes from here with Apple and then Amazon and other companies like this. I think it's very clear that we're accelerating to a lot of different monopolistic companies. And like there's just a bunch of small examples that you can see that kind of point out what's going on and when these companies are in spaces you wouldn't expect. I mean, everyone being in the streaming space is a big one, like Apple having their own, Amazon having their own, and producing good quality big shows. It's also weird to see a movie that is an MGM, has the MGM logo, and then it says an Amazon company underneath it. To me, nothing feels more dystopian than that. Like, wow, we're in the future where the MGM of all companies is just owned by Amazon, and so much has changed in the film world and everything that it's like, okay, it kind of makes sense that would happen at this point. But the next one is self-driving cars, and that's because Google owns Waymo, and so now they're going to need to be spinning off Waymo as well as a result of this.
Yeah, they're saying the self-driving car market could be worth up to $10 trillion, which is wild. It's like its own industry. It would destroy an Uber. It would destroy a Lyft. It would, it would just be a whole new world that we couldn't even recognize. We've talked about this a lot on the Tesla channel and things like that, but self-driving cars, it's so hard for people to understand because everyone thinks about like, oh yeah, I'm going to own a car that drives itself. It's like, no one's going to own a car anymore. You're just going to call something like an Uber and it's going to be a million times cheaper. And we can't even imagine what that world looks like because when they try to describe it to us, okay, we have like 1,000 parking stalls in a parking lot that's in the middle of the city, and anytime anyone needs a car, it just like leaves from there and then goes back to these charging spaces on this parking lot. You can't even imagine how that looks right now. Everyone's still like, oh no, my car that I drive is going to drive itself. And that might be true, but like, why would you need a car at that point? So it's just really confusing to people how big this is going to be.
Yeah, I think that is also why Apple was doing so much research into this space. They wanted their Apple car to be a self-driving car, and then they ended up giving up on it. I mean, this is Tesla's whole pitch right now. Of course, the bread and butter of their business right now is still selling cars, and they have to hold on to that. But Elon Musk is always just looking way further down the line, and he's just looking at that future you're talking about with self-driving cars. Some question if Tesla can do it, but Waymo already has cars on the road doing this in geo-fenced areas, which is very cool, but then also it's expensive and not profitable yet. So that will be interesting to see because it seems like they kind of need this funding from this giant conglomerate that is Google or Alphabet. And what does spinning them off mean for that? And yeah, do they need to, it's like a preemptive spin-off almost because it's not like Waymo is contributing anything to Tesla, to Google being this big at this point. But I guess it's just they're looking at this and across the board saying, okay, all of these things are going to be too big and going to be too interconnected. I'm curious, like, how can search be connected with Waymo? Do you see that?
It's the same thing as everything. If it has your location data, which Google has anyways, or like even Apple does too, have you gone into your iPhone or seen Google Maps and they go like, where have you been? And you look at your history and you're like, oh my God, this app has been following me my entire life.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's scary. They keep all your location data. So imagine just that on top of the car. It's why Apple has Apple CarPlay. They get all your location data. They get everything, you do in a car or how you use your car and interact with your car. So it's wild. It's a ton of data. And, Tesla is just a car company with all the car data. Imagine if they had search and everything else under their belt, or, if X and Tesla and SpaceX were the same company, like I think Elon is preemptively, making sure these companies are separate companies. They can work together, they can have partnerships, but they can also have partnerships with other companies. But, it's so odd. Like, nothing in Elon's space is this monopoly that they've let happen, but everything in Google, Facebook, Apple world is such a monopoly that they've let happen. It's so one-sided, at least right now.
Yeah, and it just really has all these implications like you're talking about what this means for other companies. So I do think about Amazon, and them in all the different spaces they're entering. And then I do think about Apple. But then I also think about, they're trying to separate Chrome from search and search from all of these different aspects of Google. But when we're looking into a future with AI, we just talked about this a lot in a different podcast, but it really changes how search works entirely. And it really takes away, kind of undercuts Google's whole advantage here. If another search engine that's AI powered can actually just deliver similar or much better results much quicker, and then they don't have this whole sponsored thing integrated yet.
Yeah, the way that Bing wins is Microsoft Copilot becomes the new 90 percentile search engine that everyone uses because no one uses search anymore. That's how Bing wins. Mm-hmm. And it's easy because Microsoft's rolling out Copilot stuff faster than everyone can do anything. And so the second you really get that integrated into people's hands, into PC users' hands, and they just get used to using that instead of Google search, Google's done for, They're still going to have a monopoly on ads. It's not going to, but really, that can go after 10% of the market share, 20% of the market share. Once people stop, using search and just keep using LLMs, it's a whole new world. They should be regulating that right now. They shouldn't be regulating this. This should have been regulated 10 years ago if they wanted to do something about it. And so it's just super odd that they do it now. And they're like, okay, now that you guys have had 10 to 20 years of being the most dominant company in the world, you should really spin off Chrome, or you should really spin off these things. But, AI is the future, and any good AI company could be taking Google down.
Yeah, when you look at a reasonably short amount of time into the future, it seems like almost every different AI service provider can catch up to some sort of functionality. Like Claude was the search thing from Anthropic. That was their best thing. And now we have Search GPT, which is somewhat catching up to that. And it's already integrated into a product that is ChatGPT that a lot of people already have. So they're just going to automatically use that. So there's a lot of stuff like that where I just don't see, we're not seeing the same advantages that we've seen for years from these companies. We're seeing it a lot more spread out, which is a good thing overall. But I'm curious to see where that goes with Google. And then it feels like Apple is going to have to follow with all of these things. I mean, if they're going to break up particularly the Android App Store, of course, it's wait, what about the Apple App Store? It's the same situation, but actually kind of worse, right?
Yeah, we'll see how it affects these companies. We'll see what happens in the EU too, because we're starting to get different regulations. I just think these regulations are too late. I don't know who they're trying to help. If you get another app store and Epic Games can make more money, or these other companies can have an alternative, but the security is dodgy, who's even going to use these, new app stores? I'm definitely not going to trust a new app store that comes out. We're so ingrained in these things. We have such a product lock-in, and it's just been too long. The time to do this was when 2 or 3 years into the App Store being a thing. But since it is what it is now, I want to use Google to search. I want to use the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. I want to use Google products on my Google devices. I want to use Chrome, and I want it to use Google. And so you could put in as many things that tell me, do you want this to be your default as you want? But I'm going to check yes to all the things that are already happening right now. I don't know how this is actually going to change my life or actually help someone else get market share.
Yeah, it feels like the way to get market share is going to be to provide the better product that more people want, as opposed to just splitting it in this case.
I don't know why that's not what they focus on, and why they don't think that's possible. And then Google's still trying to provide the better product with Gemini, and it's not the best one out there. And so, they have a chance to lose. Everyone has a chance to lose right now. It feels fun. It feels exciting, But for the past 10 years, they didn't. It wasn't competitive. It isn't competitive right now, with search. So it's just way too late. And I think it was good that they allowed companies to grow enough so we get something like a Waymo so we can use that revenue to do something else with. That's why right now is so exciting. We actually have a chance to see Google get dethroned by something. And it's not going to be by, do you want to make this your default browser? It's exactly what you said, providing the next best thing.
So we'll see what company can provide that thing. And if Apple is able to somehow grow enough with their AI efforts to take that on and be that next best thing, and then if sometime down the line they're going to also be broken up as a result.